Brexit was never the people versus the elites. It was a tussle between elites on one side, who have an economic advantage from trading with the European Union, and economic elites on the other side who gain advantages from economic protectionism. That's it. Right? Do you think the guy from Wetherspoons wanted UK more sovereignty over its own laws? No. He knew that it would be good for his own business. As David Cameron, literally the leader of the pro-Remain campaign, literally the man of the biggest establishment in the country, the Conservative Party, at the time. Now, obviously, one of the big sticking issues at the moment that people have been continually talking about recently, because of the kind of polling that we've seen in support or against it, is Brexit, right? So I don't cover much Brexit stuff on my channel, as I'm pretty ambivalent to Brexit as an issue and to the European Union as an issue. I see the good things, I see its faults, all the pros, all the cons, whatever it might be. But it's difficult to deny that Brexit has been handled incredibly poorly, regardless of whether you agree with it or whether you don't. The actual Brexit history of this country has been an absolute mess from start to finish. It's almost like you shouldn't have put bumbling idiots in charge and you should have had Corbyn in charge for doing it. Regardless, the poor effects of it have been magnified specifically by how poorly that it's been done. To which Brexiteers are really upset after getting exactly what they wanted, implemented in the way they wanted as well, right? Let's not remember that the Brexiteers really did want this absolute mishmash, no-deal nonsense Brexit rather than remaining in the customs union or some kind of EFTA agreement or remaining in the single market, whatever it might be, for example. Now, one of those Brexit commentators is from the worst publication in the UK, which is Spiked Online, right? And she's called Ella Whelan. She was on LBC, and there was a discussion with a bunch of kind of Remainer types, including one I really fucking hate, from the Conservative Party. LBC just posted a clip of this on YouTube. We're gonna watch, and I'm gonna give my thoughts on the issue of Brexit, for example. Brexit is like a poker game with the UK and the EU, and the UK blinked, and that's why it was always stupid. It was never gonna. Whereas in the year of our Lord 2023, we're facing global problems that require global diplomatic solutions, continually engaging in the fucking ridiculous push-pull negotiations, completely voluntarily with one of the biggest trading blocks in the country. It was always a stupid idea in the first place. But either way, let's have a look. Let's watch Ella Whelan try and defend the issues that have gone wrong with Brexit. Let's go.
Our fault that it's the I will not accept is that it's somehow our fault that it's the fault of voters in Bolton or in Tottenham or all the places where there's
nobody has said that.
We've had a rolling series of crises. If you look at how people, the average working class person's life in this country has either not changed in the last 20 years.
It's worth pointing out as well, right? I've mentioned this on the channel before, and I'm going to mention it again for anyone who's not known or for posterity, whoever it might be, right? Brexit was never the people versus the elites. It never was that. It was a tussle between elites on one side, who have an economic advantage from trading with the European Union, and economic elites on the other side who gain advantages from economic protectionism. That's it. Right? Do you think the guy from Wetherspoons wanted to leave the European Union because he thought it was give the UK more sovereignty over its own laws? No, he knew that it would be good for his own business, because he sources all of his beer locally and doesn't want cheap imports being used by other bar chains to be able to compete with his pub. That's literally it, right? And all of the David Cameron was literally the leader of the pro-Remain campaign, for example. Literally the man who murdered 300,000 people with austerity in this country. Let him forget that. He was the pro-EU side of this, literally the man of the biggest establishment in the country, the Conservative Party, at the time. So let's stop trying to have this framing. The Brexit was like the people versus the elites. It was always the elites versus the elites. And there are good points that you can make for the way in which working people do get affected by remaining in the European Union or by leaving the European Union, right? But that's not what this vote was about. That's not what this vote was about at all, and anyone who thinks that it was is deluding themselves. Because was there any discussion being had about the benefits of leaving the competition regulations from the European economic treaties, for example, during the Brexit vote? No, there was only right-wing arguments being heard. Left, like Lexiteers, who had good points to be made about wanting to extricate ourselves from the economic treaties that give us makes us harder for using state-owned enterprises to be able to interfere with markets, or for nationalisation without compensation, for example. All good points, right? All points I agree with, right? All points that I agree with. Was that point coming up to the referendum? No. If you voted Brexit off the idea that somehow we were going to get these benefits of leaving the competition regulation in the European Union, you were fucking deluding yourself. I'm sorry, you were completely delusional. So, you know, despite those good arguments, the idea that I was ever on the table at all is nonsense.
Years or gotten markedly worse, and that is because you've had a British economy that is not just sluggish but constantly failing, and politicians with all rosettes only talking about tinkering around the edges. There has been no kind of vision, no big idea in relation to the economy.
That was literally the Brexiteers' job. You were the people asking for this, like the figureheads of the movement for this. Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage, for example, right? Spiked online of all places, for example. You know, all of these, you know, privately schooled journalists coming out of the ex-living Marxism journalists, no less, trying to paint themselves as speaking up for the little guy, wherever it might be. No, it was literally your guys' job to have a plan in the first place and to implement it once you had your man in power. And your man got into power. He became Prime Minister off the back of supporting Brexit, out in the wake of Theresa May trying and failing when she didn't even support it in the first place. It was Boris Johnson's job to have a vision. Was there any vision? No. Was there any vision from Farage? No. In fact, Farage had so little vision that in the run-up to the referendum, he was talking about having a Norway-style deal, for example, and that, you know, there was Daniel Hannan talking about never leaving the single market, for example. And then as soon as Brexit does happen and the ERG gain control and the red lines start forming where there's supposed to be no economic relationship with the European Union whatsoever, for example, completely abandoning the Good Friday Agreement, that was your guys' plan. And what, you're saying it's somehow Remainers' fault for this? Like, get in reality.
And the reason why I mentioned Liz Truss was, as terrible as her announcement and her plans were, at least she got the label right. I mean, at least the word growth inspired some.
Sorry, she was a catastrophe, and she cost 60 billion with her mini budget. So.
It's also amusing that she's saying, "Oh, there was no. We are in an economic rut." I'm like, yeah, because of the economic policies that you support. You support free market libertarianism, right? We've had free market neoliberalism essentially for 45 years unabated. Has it given us the massive rise in living standards that we were told that it would do? Of course it fucking hasn't, right? The only person, again, I will say this every single time because I always say this over and over and over again, the real vision was coming from the left and always was, right? It always was coming from the left. The only vision that we've had at all in the past 45 years has come from fucking Jeremy Corbyn. Literally. That's where the vision was. There was a vision for a proper workers' Brexit in 2017. Did Ella Whelan support the workers' Brexit of Jeremy Corbyn in 2017? Did she fuck?
Actually, that figure has been disproved.
But there was also, let's come into it. There was a big idea. It was called Brexit. And Brexit has somehow disappeared. With the pandemic, it got muddled up and no one knows. We don't know the impact of Brexit on inflation.
We do know that the government
prices and the rest of it. And actually, those of us who...
Yeah, that's true, Elron, actually, exactly. That is true. That they think that Truss and Kwarteng were this kind of conservative anomaly rather than the driving force behind the vast majority of the Conservatives' economic policy up until now, for example. It's not watching the IEA and the Conservative Party had no links before Truss and Kwarteng. Get a reality check. And also, you know, Liz Truss was put there by the Conservative membership. Liz Truss's politics is what the Conservative membership want. They wanted that. And now, is there any wonder why they're all running off to Reform UK when that style of economics is being repudiated by Sunak and Hunt?
Who were vehemently against Brexit.
We do.
I think know that we're being proved to be right.
One at a time.
We know some of the costs. I think it's the LSE have just done a report that Brexit added 6 billion to food bills because of the extra costs there. There's worker shortages because lots of fruit rotting in the fields. We've got Brexit supply problems getting over the border. Our trade has collapsed by 15%. The Office for Budget Responsibility have said that Brexit is costing us 4% of GDP, which is double the amount that the COVID pandemic cost. So there's increasing evidence about the costs of Brexit that'll have to be addressed by future governments.
Hang on a second, Tobias. We haven't heard from Tobias.
And you also got to remember, right, Brexit may be 4% of the lack of growth or the shrinking of the economy that we've seen, for example, over the past 6 years, or whatever it might be, for example. I keep saying, for example, I need to stop. I keep saying right and for example. I need to get better and not just saying the same thing when I don't know what to say. But it's worth pointing out that if there was a better deal in place, right, we wouldn't have had the massive economic destruction from the poor Brexit deal that we got, right? 4% isn't specifically related to Brexit as a concept. It is related to the kind of Brexit that we got. Because not only will Brexiteers look at the state of Brexit and go, this isn't what we wanted, Remainers will look at the Brexit that we got and go, this is the only Brexit that exists. This is all there was because of Brexit. We now have to rejoin the European Union, although leaving the European Union in its entirety is solely to blame for all this, the entire 4%, right? If I think we would have had better economic growth if we'd have done what I wanted to do, which was leave the economic treaties in the way that people like Mélenchon and Zizek want to do, right? They are big fans of leaving the economic treaties whilst remaining in a diplomatic union. And I think that's a good idea. To use that to be able to use the power of state-owned enterprises to be able to strengthen people's living standards and grow the economy through infrastructure spending. And I think would be a good thing to do. And you'd be able to have some kind of mishmash of Brexits if we'd not had as hard a Brexit as we did, for example, right? I think it'd be far more correct for people like Angela Regal, who I agree with broadly on this kind of subject, to say no deal Brexit, for example, or our Brexit deal, or the Conservative Brexit deal is why we have such low growth in this country, for example. When you could very differently say, if Labour had done Brexit, if Corbyn had done Brexit, we'd be in a much better and much stronger position economically. But of course, Angela Regal can't say that because she never wanted Corbyn to be Prime Minister in the first place.
Well, thank you. and absolutely, these are these three biggies that we've just summarised that have affected our economy. I'm pleased to see us finally addressing this issue of Brexit. Most people don't know that the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, to give it its full name, comes up for a formal...
The thing is, Landphobe, right, is that obviously a lot of Brexiteers will blame the pandemic, and I think they are going to push a lot of Brexit's failures onto the pandemic specifically, and I think you're right in making that connection. But it's also worth noting that the comparisons with countries that are not having the problems that we're having is not just a Brexit comparison. It's also a economic structure comparison, right? We did neoliberalism the hardest of any country in Europe. Right? That's why we have the economic malaise and the cost of living crisis and the high inflation that we're having at the moment. A lot of this is just down to having a poorer economic model than the remainder of the European Union countries, for example. And then, again, neoliberal Remainer types like Tobias Ellwood will then say that their vision for the economy that they like to see, which is essentially what we have at the moment, for example, the economic model we have currently, can be in no way to blame for economic malaise because that can all be blamed on both Brexit and the pandemic. And I think that these are all multiple different facets of the economic turmoil that we're facing at the moment.
Review in about 18 months' time. We have to decide whether what we've got, this Brexit deal, is worth continuing in its current form, or do we dare to finesse it, to tweak it, to change it? Nobody wants to discuss it. This is Angela's the first person from the Labour side that I've heard speak with any energy about it. And I absolutely agree. This model is costing us about 4% of our GDP every single year. Add that to what's happened with COVID-19, which is another £300 billion bill. And then, of course, there's Ukraine. The Ukraine piece is concerning to me because it actually exposes just how volatile our own economy is to international headwinds, as indeed Brexit, indeed COVID as well. But we seem to ignore...
The thing is, you'll say, oh, well, I mean, the Ukraine war has exposed how vulnerable our economy is. I'm like, yes, our economy is vulnerable. That's fucking neoliberalism. There's literally neoliberalism that did that. Brexit is obviously affecting our ability to trade, for example, and things like import costs and tariff costs. That doesn't help, right? But fundamentally, the fact that our state could be intervening in the market to bring prices down in the wake of economic headwinds, like they're doing in France, no less, freezing energy bills at 4% increases, for example, we cannot do that here. We cannot do that here. And there's fundamentally a problem with neoliberalism rather than Brexit specifically, right? Both the neoliberal economic structure and Brexit are parts of the issue that he's highlighting here. But of course, Tobias Ellwood's single bugbear is Brexit, and he is a neoliberal. So is he ever going to mention neoliberalism or even attribute any blame to it? No, of course he's not, because it's completely faultless as an economic system as far as he's concerned.
All that, and only focus from a domestic perspective. I've called for some time that we put effort into seeing those grain ships leave Odessa to get to international markets. Just a fifth of the grain is getting out. And we've now realizing very late in the day that Ukraine is the breadbasket for Europe and indeed beyond. Get that grain out, you help reduce the prices, it'll help the Ukrainian economy, it'll help Africa completely, but most importantly, it'll also help Europe, including the UK, tackle the cost of living crisis. And there is no plan to do any of that.
As the only Brexiteer on the panel, do you want to address that?
Please, yes. Lord save us. As the only representative of the...
And what's frustrating as well is you'll have these panel discussions where you have 3 ardent Remainers, 1 ardent Brexiteer, and no one like myself, for example, who is ambivalent on this entire issue. Like, we don't have a discussion from myself who wants to actually think about this, all these discussions in a completely different sphere and thinking about this from a kind of more rational perspective rather than wanting to, entirely view the issue through the lens of what specific bugbear they have with Remain or Leave or whatever it might be.
Majority of the Brexit.
But of course, I know I have a specific bugbear with neoliberalism, but of course I'm correct and they're wrong, so it helps.
Well, I am too, but I can't get involved, obviously.
I don't want to rehash.
Tell us, how's it going?
I don't want to rehash this, the Brexit argument, but what I will say is it's pretty sick making the relish with which politicians enjoy looking, describing and rubbing our nose in how bad they say it's all going. I don't think any Brexiteer with 2 brain cells to rub together thinks genuinely that we're in a rosy, sunlit uplands, whatever it is.
Constructive change
And
as to where you would take
hang on a
Brexit.
minute,
That's
Tobias.
the question.
Hang on a minute, Tobias. I haven't been in Westminster making the calls. I tell you, if I had, there'd be a lot of things that were different.
You just said you're a Brexiteer.
Yeah, but
We're
I
all
don't have any...
Brexiteers. We all are living with Brexit.
Hang on.
I'm saying this model of Brexit is not working, so tell us, how do we change it?
Let us speak.
I know. I'm used to Remainers shouting at me, and don't worry about
I'm not a Remainer. I'm a post-Brexiteer. We're all post-Brexiteers. The fact that you label people...
let her speak, please.
But, the thing is, as I was saying, I don't think anyone thinks we're living in a one that I've just described how bad the cost of living crisis is. No one thinks that things are going well. The point is...
I know, right? Literally an entire panel full of people I fucking despise.
I'm not sat in the House of Commons making policy or making law. Part of the Brexit vote, the excitement of it was giving more democracy to ordinary people, to your average Joe and Jane. And unfortunately, what this government has done, and with no help...
How have we got more democracy? In what way have we gotten more democracy? Well, we voted in a referendum one time, right? Okay, brilliant. That's huge amounts of democracy that we now have even less of because the government is literally trying to make it harder for people to even vote in the first place. Come on, if you wanted to have a radical rethink of democracy, Ms. Spiked Online, right? I would be all up for it. I love democracy. I would want to see more democracy, right? Is that democracy coming down to people's workplaces? Is it going down to basic levels of the way in which we engage with our electoral system? Are we removing first past the post? Of course we're fucking not, right? Come on.
From the opposition come from the sidelines is make a complete hames of it, has make a total mess of any kind of potential that we could have had.
That was all.
So to put into perspective, JDM, this is how much this panel is entirely full of completely detestable individuals. You have someone from the Conservative Party, you have someone from Spiked Online, you have someone from the Labour right, and you have Greg Dyke.
By spending, hang on a minute, by spending, I know you can laugh at...
It was always going to be the Brexiteers argument. When it didn't work, well, it could have worked if you'd done that.
So what would you do?
Oh, that's actually true, Kieran. We had European Parliament elections before. We don't even have them now. If anything, we have less democracy. Although, to be fair, to say democracy is when you vote more is probably a bit of a bad tangent to go down.
The scorn in this room is unbelievable. And actually, to be serious for a second,
to be fair, Mario Rent, until the Ukraine war, I hadn't got a fucking clue about how much grain Ukraine exported. I was completely ignorant of the issues surrounding the country of Ukraine in its entirety before Russia invaded. I'm sorry. I knew about Makhnovshina, and I knew about the Holodomor. That's all I knew about Ukraine up until that point. That and one of their football teams is called Shakhtar Donetsk. Those are the only things I knew about Ukraine before the war started. So I apologise, future viewers, for me admitting that you are literally spending your time watching an idiot. So please turn off. Don't do that. Please keep watching, but it's a joke. Everyone here agrees and they just have aesthetic differences. They all agree about neoliberalism, JDM. What they don't agree about is Brexit, which is the real issue here.
To be serious for a second.
You're not very curious because you won't let us speak.
The things that could have been differently is that you could have had politicians take seriously the exciting prospect of voting citizens wanting to be more involved in politics, looking at big things like sovereignty, big things like democracy, talking about how we could change British politics for the better. You know, that take back control slogan might have been slandered as some kind of ridiculous Nigel Farage side of the bus, whatever it is. And you can go down that route if you want. Or actually, if you cared about, as you seem to opine like you do, about the average, person who, you say, oh, it's so bad, they're going to food banks, oh, it's so terrible, everyone's a hard time. If you actually cared about their political prospects and the future of their political lives, you would have taken seriously the challenge that Brexit set the British political class.
What's this? So Brexit is just good because it's a challenge? Are you fucking insane, right? But the issue wasn't the fact that people were participating in democracy. That's good, right? More participation in democracy is good. But the problem is the people who were tasked with and who were putting forward the case for the side of leaving the European Union had no plan, no idea, not a fucking clue what they were doing, and the entirety of the referendum was set up that it was just yes, no, in or out, that's it, that's all you're being asked about. If you really wanted actual democracy, actual, genuine, real democratic participation in this, maybe have a referendum that has multiple options, more than just yes, no. You have proper discussions on both sides about what the deal is going to look like before you have the vote in the first place, right? You get people more involved in the decision-making process about how the deals go down, which nobody on either side of this discussion did do at all. From the beginning to end, the people were not consulted about this. As I said right at the start of this segment, it was elites fighting against elites. Regular people were not in control of any of this. Again, it's genuinely fucking delusional to think that Brexit was the kind of the wail of the unheard masses. I'm sorry, Ella, you're completely delusional. Completely delusional. Yeah, exactly. Where are the citizens' assemblies? Where are the citizens' assemblies going to be coming from? Right, 100%. You're absolutely right, JDM.
Unfortunately, it has been squandered, and I'm miserable about that. But what I will not accept is that it's somehow our fault, that it's the fault of voters in Bolton or in Tottenham or all the places where there's...
Sorry, nobody has said that.
For you to sit here, hang on a minute.
Nobody has said that. You are putting words into people's mouths and then saying that they're our views and they are not. This is ridiculous.
I mean, for once, I have to agree with both Tobias and Angela, which of course hurts my very soul. I have to say that I agree with fucking Tobias Elwood, but she's a completely straw-manning them, right? She's 100% straw-manning what they're saying there by saying that somehow they are sneering at the voters of Bolton and places like that who voted to leave. And the sneering came from Emily Thornberry, who literally did sneer about the fact that she thought her constituents were better because they voted Remain. Again, the issue with the kind of rot at the heart of the soft left types at the height of the Labour Party who believe they are genuinely better than everybody else, and that kind of snobbery did stem from a lot of the Remainer types, for example, but in the same way that lots of vitriol was being flown from the other side as well. This was not a one-way street, for example. But both Angela and Tobias specifically, as well as myself, are critiquing the people at the top, the people who were tasked with making the decisions to be able to make Brexit not shit, for example. And that was Nigel Farage in part, and mostly Boris Johnson and his cabinet people like David Davis, for example, Dominic Raab. Did they give us anything good? No, they failed. These who are being criticised for their poor handling of the Brexit issue. Again, just saying, Corbyn was negotiating it, we've had a better Brexit. Just saying, if Corbyn was there in 2017 negotiating Brexit, we'd have had a much better deal. I love how the thing that upsets them most is people are personally insulting them, not the issues affecting thousands of people who they elected to care about. Well, yeah, that's also true, JDM, yeah.
ridiculous.
For you to sit here and scoff and say,
I'm not scoffing. I want to know what you do better. I'm still asking this, but Ian's going to tell me to shut up again. I want to know what will change.
I'm going
Anyway, let's move on. I'm going to shoot myself.
tell you all to shut up because we have to go to the news.
And that's the thing, right? Again, it's just frustrating that we never, again, all of this. I mean, Brexit as an issue in the first place was being used. First of all, the reason why we had the referendum in the first place was because of pressure from Nigel Farage. You know, there was clearly a large public sentiment against the EU. It was worth having a discussion about this. I'm not saying it wasn't. But also the reason why we had this debate in the first place was because of falling living standards and because of austerity and because of the failures of neoliberalism and the housing crisis that it precipitated and the death of working class communities because of the lack of manufacturing jobs, because of neoliberalism and the change to a service economy. All these things that are the failures of neoliberalism, which caused the Brexit issue to be magnified so much, right? The depression of wages over the past however many years because of neoliberal anti-trade union laws, for example, that stymied collective bargaining, that stymied, that shrunk union density in this country, that meant that workers' wages were not rising with productivity in the way that they should have been, that could then easily have been blamed on immigration as the reason for falling wages. So again, neoliberalism caused the anti-immigrant sentiment that was used to precipitate the Brexit vote to begin with, because let's not forget, the vast majority of vote to do with Brexit was not about a neoliberal, it was not about changing to a libertarian economic model, it was about immigration, right? I'm not going to say it's racist, but people clearly didn't wanted immigration to come down in this country, and that was a large driver of the vote to leave the European Union, to leave the single market, to leave the freedom of movement behind. So they're not to be freedom of movement moving forward for better or for worse. But again, the reason why these opinions precipitate was because of the fucking neoliberalism. Every single time it's always neoliberalism, and having Remainer neoliberals and Brexit neoliberals continually fighting over the finer points of whether or not having some kind of trade agreement with the European Union is somehow the fault of the reason for economic malaise, rather than the continual failures of garbage economic policy from idiots who don't know what they're doing for 45 fucking years, right? Because they're all from the political establishment. Ella Whelan, Angela Eagle, Tobias Ellwood, they're all the political establishment. They're the elites fighting against each other over something something, as far as I'm concerned, is completely consequential on the grand scale of things, for example, right? As far as I'm concerned, the real issue with Brexit is losing our diplomatic relationship with the European Union, losing our ability to be able to come together with other nations to solve macro problems on a macro scale, rather than expecting every individual country to be able to fight things atomized individually. Ironically, a very neoliberal way of viewing these kind of things, for example. But you just see how completely protracted these debates get, because no one wants to admit where the real problem lies and why we are in the position that we are in today. Very simple.